Alex computer. All right. So let me see if I can't share my screen. Only just making sure at a time, yes. Or multiple. Oh, a second.
So you usually develop on a Mac or?
Yeah, so I have a weird kind of backstory. I love Node, but my primary job, I work for a company called Bill, formerly known as Bill.com, and I work on the mobile app side. So I help them out on the iOS and the Android applications. And up until actually, we have a React Native application, so we do use Node as part of our tool chain, but we're actually transitioning over to doing everything native. So all the Android applications will be written specifically with native tools for that platform. The same thing on the iOS side. But we're still technically we support both native and React Native. So Node is part of our tool chain. We do use it in the rest of our company. But I work on the mobile side, so I normally don't work with a lot of the Node tooling on a day-to-day basis. But I personally love Node, which is one of the reasons why I'm involved with the group. So.
Oh, I said Windows. You said they usually use Windows. So I said, oh, so you normally develop on a Mac.
Yeah, so the main reason for that is because we use Xcode, and Xcode you have to have a Mac. So, so anyways, let me go ahead and pull up my slides if I can remember where I put them. Here. Let's try this slides. Here we go. And let me change the view here. All right. So the focus tonight is going to be actually on a couple different things. The Photoshop API is what most of the demos is built for. But I figured I'd go ahead and just go ahead and announce that we are looking for speakers for upcoming meetings and stuff like that. And so it can be on anything. It doesn't have to be on Node.js. It can be on Go, because a lot of the developers that I've worked with in the past, it's like they switched to using microservice architecture, so they're not using any one thing on the back end. Plus, we also in the past have covered a lot of front end technology, so we'll cover React and Angular and all the other different types of front end frameworks as well. So it could be on anything. It could be on databases. We did one last year on Postgres SQL. So anything that can be used as part of the front end, back end tool chain. So we're open for all kinds of different things. So absolutely, yeah. Okay. So I want to go ahead and get started with a couple of updates. So it's been a while since we've had a meeting, but Node 18 is currently the LTS version of Node. I remember when I first started working with Node, it was 0.8. So yeah, there's been a lot of version changes. So there, the trend right now is to do 2 updates, 2 major releases a year. And generally, what they do is the even releases will become the LTS release. And then all the next gen stuff, all the stuff they're working on, gets put into the next major release after that, and then they'll continue working on that. And then once that's all those changes and stuff are ready or considered, feature complete, they get merged into another major branch that then becomes the LTS. So eventually, Node 20 will become the Node LTS version, but right now, Node 18 is currently the LTS version. That's the version that I'm going to be presenting with tonight. I also want to mention that there's some alternative JS runtimes that started to become popular in the last, I'd say couple of years. One of those is Deno, and Deno is actually from the guy who created the Node.js, original version of Node.js. He kind of left the project, a couple of years in, and then was working on some other stuff. And then he said, there's a lot of stuff I would have done differently if I could do it all over again. And so he's kind of doing it all over again. And Deno is kind of unique is that it's a runtime that's not just for JavaScript, but also you can run TypeScript applications without having to do a transpilation step. It does a transpilation step automatically. So that's one to definitely keep an eye out. And then another one is that popped up in the last year or so is Bun. And Bun is, I think it gets its name from the fact that it's able to bundle things like very quickly, but that's actually supposed to be like a very super fast JavaScript runtime. So it's supposed to be even faster. And a lot of things it's faster than the Node.js. There's some compatibility issues with both Deno and Bun as far as like node modules you might be used to using. But Deno, they've recently added the capability of being able to use node modules in Deno. They have a slightly different, the runtime works slightly differently for being able to incorporate modules, but it's not, neither one of those is dependent upon the NPM package manager. So just want to give that a quick mention. So since the subject is going to be on image manipulation, this is probably the earliest known Photoshop. I forget the name of the Yeskov, I think it was the name of this guy here on the right of the picture. That's him standing next to Stalin. And he fell out of favor with the Kremlin. And so they had this picture of Stalin that I guess Stalin liked. And so like a lot of pictures with people that became, let's say they had to get rid of, they also had to go into the pictures and remove them as well. And so Yeskov was removed from the picture as well. And this is actually done with, I believe they just did airbrushing or something like that to remove him from this photo. But that's one of those things that would be commonly used with Photoshop. So for those that aren't familiar with Photoshop, it's I think most people kind of identify it as being a tool that graphic artists use. It was first introduced in 1991, and it was really just kind of a tool that graphic artists would use. And the thing is, like, it wasn't really a tool that programmers would use or software engineers. But they did add scripting through a plugin in the late 90s. And then they officially added it in version 7. So by the time version 7 came out in 2002, you could use a scripting language like JavaScript or AppleScript or VBScript to script a lot of the stuff that you could do with Photoshop. But still, that was on basically, Photoshop is something that you typically install on a desktop machine. So it's not something that you'd have installed or running on a server. And it really wouldn't scale well for doing stuff like that in the server. And there's been some experimentation. Adobe, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, they added a way that you could actually write Photoshop extensions using Node.js. I did a presentation on that way back when. But the thing that really caught my attention was I saw a post on Medium from Raymond Camden, who works at Adobe, and he was kind of talking about how you could use this Photoshop API service. So I wanted to make that kind of the focus of the meeting. These two gentlemen, I want to give them an honorable mention. This is John Knoll on the left and Thomas Knoll on the right. And Thomas Knoll was a PhD student who was working on, believe it or not, artificial intelligence and image processing back in the, I say, late 1980s. And his brother, John Knoll, is probably best known for being kind of one of those visual effects gurus at Industrial Light and Magic. And so John Knoll was seeing some of the stuff that his brother was building, and it's like, man, we could really use that where I work. And so, he started suggesting things as well. Why don't you add this feature? Why don't you add this and stuff like that? And then he had some downtime from ILM, and he said, you know what? I think we could sell this. I think we could sell this program. And his brother was like, man, that's a lot of work to actually make a commercial, software application. And so John Knoll started going around Silicon Valley, shopping around to different, software companies in Silicon Valley. And he finally, Adobe saw it and decided, hey, man, this would be a really good addition to the stuff that we're already doing with graphics. And so they wound up selling it to or licensing it to Adobe. And I believe Tom Knoll still works at Adobe. I think he works on the raw filter for Photoshop, but for a long time he was the head programmer on Photoshop. And John Knoll, I believe, contributed all the way up to Photoshop 3.0, but he's pretty busy, I think, at Industrial Light and Magic, working on movies and stuff like that. But the reason why I wanted to bring them up is because one of the reasons I am a software engineer today is because of John Knoll. So back in the day, I used to use Photoshop for my day job, and back then, the internet really wasn't a thing. And so the way that you would, go online, so to speak, to get help is you would go on to like CompuServe or AOL. Well, there was a group on AOL for Photoshop users, and John Knoll would be on that group every night answering people's questions. And so I would have questions and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm kind of interested in writing software and stuff like that. What do I need? He's like, oh, this is what you need, and stuff like that. And so he started giving me pointers and stuff like that on, how to become a software engineer. So the reason why I'm a software engineer is because of the man on the left. So this is kind of what the desktop interface for Photoshop kind of looks like. You have a toolbar there on the left. You have your picture up in the center of the application, file menu at the top and stuff like that. And then you have all these different tools and stuff like that that you can use. You can create actions, work with layers and stuff like that. It's a very sophisticated, mature product at this point. So that brings me to the next question. Why would we need to use image processing in Node.js? Well, there's actually a bunch of different reasons why you might want to use image processing in Node.js. So one of the common things that people will do is you've probably seen this on a website you go to where it's like, oh, can you upload a picture for this item or something like that? And then you go to upload a picture. And a lot of times, people will just use their phone or something like that to take the picture. And nowadays, the pictures that you take with your phone, that may be, a 7 megabyte image, right? And the image that they use in the web is probably only going to be like maybe about 100K or 200K or something like that. So you don't need to have there we go. So yeah, you don't need to have like a this giant image and stuff that you typically would take. So so a very common thing is just to basically make a smaller version or make thumbnails. A lot of times there's a process where you want to be able to put like a watermark on the image and stuff like that. And there's even effects and filters you might be able to run, like Instagram, for example. So a lot of people, like using Instagram, and they'll take like selfies and stuff like that. There's all kinds of filters.
When you click accept, did you let somebody else share the camera? Because it says Kevin Miller.
Yes, yeah, I just added. So
okay, I just wanted to make sure that you didn't accidentally click that and now somebody's going to be on there. Like,
no, I sent the link out. So welcome, Kevin. Hopefully you can hear us. So anyways, so yeah, so there's all kinds of different reasons and stuff like that. The effects filters are pretty popular now, like being able to do kind of like a soft focus, or if you've seen people that take like pictures on Instagram and stuff like that, you'll see filters and stuff, all the time. And a lot of that stuff can be done without using Photoshop. So that's one of the things I also want to kind of make clear in the presentation tonight is that there's actually a lot of different tools that are free that you can use for being able to do image manipulation with Node.js. So some of these options include Graphics Magic, Image Magic. Those are both open source, free tools and stuff like that for working with images. There's also something called the Lightweight Image Processor. There's Photoshop Generator, which I talked about before, but probably the most common one that you probably see a lot, especially if you use a tool like some of the site generator tools and stuff like that. They use Sharp is very popular. So Gatsby.js is an example of something that uses Sharp for doing a lot of the image processing in that application. And then, of course, you can do this stuff with the Photoshop API too, but there's a cost associated with doing that. So Graphics Magic, that requires external dependencies. So it's not as simple as just installing a Node module into your application. You also have to make sure that the host machine that's running your Node applications also running the tool. And that can be installed very easily now using brew install on a Mac as an example, but if Chocolatey, I guess, like on Windows. So it's a very popular tool. LWhip has a dependency that requires a C++ library. It actually uses Node.js to compile that. It's very fast and it supports a lot of different formats and stuff like that. But one of the problems with this one is that if you want to use this, let's say in an application where you're doing stuff on the front end and the back end, it'll work on the back end, but it's not going to necessarily work on the front end. And that brings me to Atwood's Law. I've heard this one before, but Jeff Atwood is one of the guys who helped start Stack Overflow, and he's worked on a bunch of other stuff. It's pretty cool. He has a very popular blog. But one of the things that he said is now referred to as Atwood's laws. Any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. And that brings me to Jimp. So Jimp is the JavaScript image processor, and has no external dependencies. So it's completely written in JavaScript. It's not as fast as using like a native add-on, but it'll work in the browser. So that's one of the things that's nice about this tool is that you can actually run it in the browser and you can also run it on the server. And it's also very portable. And this is the one I use primarily for a long time with Node until I started working with Gatsby. And once I started working with Gatsby, that uses Sharp throughout that product, and it's really, really fast. And so that brings us to, well, this is an example here. If you want to use Jimp, it's just as simple as importing in the module, and then once you have the module, you can load up a image. So if you look right here at this example, you can see that it's loading up a PNG file, and then it's using a promise to handle basically what to do with the object once it loads it in. And so here it's doing a resize, it's changing the quality, setting it to grayscale, and then writing it out as a JPEG. So just with a couple lines of code, you can do a lot with that image. And that brings me to Sharp. So Sharp is also a Node.js module. It's probably about 5 to 7 times faster than using ImageMagick or Graphics Magic. And it's mostly used for, resizing images and saving in different formats. It doesn't have a lot of the different features and stuff that you'd see in some of the other modules I mentioned previously. So for instance, like, there's a bunch of different filters and stuff like that. It's probably not the best project. But one of the reasons why it is so fast is it's using the libvips C++ library. And so it is a native add-on. And so they're doing a pretty good job of actually, when you go to download the module, you're most likely are not going to have to compile it because they're bringing over basically a native library that you can use along with it as well. And so, it's fully optimized for the ARM processors and for the Intel x86 64 processors. And that brings me to the Photoshop API. So I got real curious about this because I'm somebody that's been using Photoshop for 30 years. And I'm like, ooh, what can you do with this, right? This looks pretty interesting. So let me see here if I can't, oops. Go back out to my browser. And this web page right here is essentially, it's the homepage for the Photoshop API. And the thing that's really nice about this is that you can go over this and it shows you everything you need to do to get started. What are some of the general workflows? They even have code samples that you can use. And even more importantly, they have an API reference. So let me One of the problems with Zoom. Let's see if I can switch. All right, let me go back here. So right now, this is still, I think, kind of considered technically in beta. It all works with basically a REST-based service. So one thing that is nice about this is that, let's say you wanted to, write the server component in Go, or you want to write it in, C# as an example. You can use this API and pretty much any language that can network over the internet. Excuse me. It's very similar to their PDF and Lightwave services. As a matter of fact, when you go through the API documentation, it shows Lightwave services along with Photoshop services. And if you're not familiar with those are also Adobe products. I think everybody's familiar with PDF files and be able to work with that. They have an API that you can use for working with PDF files, but Lightwave is a tool that is kind of similar to Photoshop in the sense that you can use it for doing image processing, but usually for doing like groups or sets of photos at a time, where you have to apply, let's say, certain filters and stuff like that. It's not as much as an artistic tool as Photoshop is, but it is a very important tool that Adobe has. So they offer essentially a subset of the core functionalities from the desktop application on the server. And so if you're looking to do something where you can run code on the server, but you need to be able to use a lot of the Photoshop's processing power or the stuff that you can do in Photoshop on the server, this is maybe the way to go. And I'm talking about specifically like if you need to use, certain Photoshop specific filters, if you need to layers.
We're gonna feed him noodles.
I'm sorry? What was the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I wasn't muted.
Oh, no problem, Kevin.
I'm so sorry. I'm trying to get dinner ready.
No problem. So I'm glad somebody's eating. So anyways, so if you need to be able to work with like presets, layers, specifically different color models, like you need to work with CMYK as opposed to RGB, or you need to use a lab model and stuff like that. All this stuff is made available with the Photoshop API. All right, so what do you need to do to get started with the Photoshop API? So there's a blog post that I wrote that goes through the steps of getting started with it. But the main thing you're going to need is you need to have an Adobe account. So the Adobe account essentially that's how they're going to charge you if you go over a certain number of operations and stuff like that. It's free up to I think like something like 5,000 or 6,000 operations. Like I said before, you can pretty much use any platform because they have it's a REST-based API. So as long as you can make REST calls from your stack, you can call the API. And then for actually working with the actual images themselves, when they need to be able to read an image in or need to write an image out, you have to use one of these file sharing type services. So for instance, like if you're already cloud-based, like let's say you're using Azure or using AWS S3 as an example, you take all your images and you put them up, let's say, on Amazon S3. And then what you can do is you can say, here is the, here's a signed URL that you could use, and then you provide that to the API. And the API will read those files in and write them out based off of the signed URLs provided by either, Azure or AWS. And then they also work with Dropbox. So if you're using Dropbox, you can use Dropbox as well. And then, of course, an internet connection. But that's basically all you need to be able to work with the Photoshop API.
So you can't just stream an image from your local machine onto.
You could, but it's going to have to go up to one of these services. It may be possible. So for instance, one of the things you could do is you could, let's say you had a publicly accessible place where you're storing your images. Let's say to read the inputs, for example. So one of the things you could do is you could say, my input, I want to make it this URL, right? And then what it'll do is, let's say you're hosting it on like a public website or whatever. They could actually go out and grab that image from the public website. The trick is getting the output and reading it back in. You have to have some type of place where they can save the image. And so most likely the way you're going to do that is to use something like S3 or Dropbox to do that. And I'm going to show some examples of how to do it. It's pretty easy to do it. All right. And let me see if I can go to the next slide. All right, so these are some of the things you can do with the API. This is stuff they have being advertised in their API. So one of the things they do is they actually have this thing that will let you remove a background from an image. So let's say you have let's say you're running a shop where you're taking a bunch of images of like catalog items you want to put on your website, as an example, and you need to be able to remove the background and put like a different background on those images and stuff like that. You can use this to either create the alpha channel that you use for removing the background, or you can use it for actually just removing the background, and then it will give you a PNG back that you can use for the image. The rendering conversion, basically what that means is, let's say you need to save out different size versions of that. That's what the rendering conversion does. Smart objects is, let's say you need to take the image that you just removed the background from and put it onto a different background. You can basically import that in as a smart object and use that. Let's say there's a set position you're going to be using inside of your template, so to speak. You can do that with a smart object. They also allow you to manipulate text. And when they allow you to manipulate text, they really allow you to manipulate text. In other words, you can use all kinds of different fonts. You can upload your own fonts that you want to use. They use all of the typesetting features and stuff that Adobe's kind of known for. So they can do all the kerning and all the other special typographic effects that you need to be able to do. And I'm going to show an example of that tonight. One of the things you can do to automate things inside of Photoshop now is something called Photoshop Actions, where you can record like a bunch of different steps that you need to do to an image. And I'm going to show a neat effect you can do using Photoshop Actions, and you can actually run those actions in the Photoshop API. You can also do layer edits, document edits, work with artboards. So they give you a lot of functionality right off the bat with the Photoshop API. Obviously, it's not going to be anywhere as fine-grained as if you had the desktop version of the application, but if you have something you need to automate over, let's say, thousands of times or millions of times, this may be the best solution for that. The next part I want to talk about is authenticating and how do you authenticate against the service. So that was the thing that I probably struggled with the most, and so essentially, there's two steps that you have to do in order to be able to do authentication. One of the things that you have to do is you either have to have them create a certificate and private key that you can use, or you can create your own and then upload the public key to them. And then once that's done, you've created your account, there's actually a landing page on their API services that provides you with API keys, secret keys, that kind of stuff that you'd use. And you just load those up essentially as environment variables. I'm not going to show those tonight because I don't want to give away my API secrets. But once you have all that stuff set up in your as your environment variables, then what you can do is you can actually use this Adobe JWT auth module. And what you can do is you can say, I just want to pass my configuration of all those different values and stuff. into here, and then what it'll do is it'll give you an access token. And once you have that access token, that's all you need to be able to make any request to the API. So they've actually kind of streamlined it. It's actually, once you've gone through the steps of getting the certificates and stuff set up, it's actually pretty easy from that point on to actually call and talk to the service. And the access token just gets passed in as a bare authorization header. So if you're familiar with doing that, I mean, usually most people that are working with REST-based APIs, that's generally how you do authentication now. So that's a very common thing. So this is really hard to see. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can't blow this up. Okay, that's a little better. So if we look at this, the way that you essentially tell the API what you want to do is that you pass in this this object, and this object has 3 keys on it. There's an inputs key, there's an outputs key. This is basically, this is the image I want to feed in, this is the image I want to get out, and then there's options. And depending on which endpoint you're calling in the Photoshop API, there's different sets of options that you could pass in and do and stuff like that. So in this example right here, what we're doing is we're actually passing in an image that we want to run a set of actions on. And so here I've specified which action name I want to run. And then inside of here, I'm passing in a signed URL with those actions in it. And so Photoshop has its own file format that it uses for actions. So you can create your actions inside of the desktop application, save that file out, and then you can upload it into the service so you can reuse those actions on, let's say, 1 million images. And then you also specify the outputs here. So that's basically what the body of the request looks like. So we kind of went over all these different stuff here, but the key thing here is that most of the instructions are actually going to be in the options. The inputs and outputs, that's just basically what files coming in, outputs, what files going out. With that, let's do a quick demo, see some actual code. All right, so that's not the application I want to show. Oops. Bear with me 1 second. Cancel. I'm sorry? Yeah. So I'm trying to use some of the same software that my company uses. So my company, we use Google. Essentially, we use Google as our office. So we use like their documents and slides and sheets for doing our spreadsheets and that kind of stuff. So I've been one of those people. I've been using Office for God knows how many years and stuff. And so I figured I'm going to try to start doing my presentations using Google for the slides. So
That's their blue, or
yeah, this is a template. That's coming up. Yeah.
I didn't know that was. Sorry. Talking about the color, kind of get that.
All right. All right, that's better. All right, so let's do this. So I'm gonna start just by showing the package.json. Let me know if you guys can read this okay.
Is this example put on top now, or did you write this for top?
No. So basically what you saw there before, I use a tool called GI.
Okay.
And GI, basically what you can do is you can just type in GI into your terminal, and then you can specify a platform. So for instance, let's say you want to do something that's a node as an example. You can say GI node and then greater than, and then dot get ignore, and it will create a get ignore file for you, and it's all coming from TopTal.
Oh, cool.
So if we go here and I go to get ignore.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so the bulk of this is actually coming from So rather than have me kind of go and create one from scratch every single time, I just use the one that's coming from top down. You can see there's a bunch of stuff in here already. I've added some of my own stuff in here, but we got stuff in there for yarns, felt kit for using felt. Excuse me. So let me go ahead and show. I'm going to start off by just going to the package.json to show you how I have this set up. So if we're looking at this, this example, I'm actually using S3 for storing all of my images, and I'm going to try to pull that up here in a second. And then I'm also using the Adobe JW off, and then I'm also using Node fetch. But that's really about it as far as the dependencies and stuff. Everything, everything essentially is just a REST call. So I'm going to show kind of like the first working example here. And let's try to pull this up here. All right. So this file right here is not that big. It's about 100 lines of code. But if we look at this, the first thing you can see that we're doing here is that we're coming up here and we're grabbing the S3 client, and we're also using the S3 request pre-signer. And that's basically what we're using for specifying, okay, this is the image that we want to use. This is the image we want to write to. We basically define that right here. And then the other thing, this is the kind of configuration stuff that I was talking about. So I have these environment variables, and this is all stuff that's provided by Adobe. So they're going to give you the client ID, the client secret, the technical account ID, the organization ID, and then they're also going to have a key that you can use as well with that. And then now I have that, the actual code for making this run is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create an instance here of the S3 client. And then after that, I'm going to define my parameters for essentially for being able to pass into the service. And I'm going to create a get command and a put command. So the get command is going to be able to go out and basically fetch the image that the service needs, and the put command is once it's done writing out that image, that's where it's going to write it to. So all that stuff is pretty simple. And Amazon makes it very easy. They have a very nice API and stuff for working with that. The next part right here is the configuration. And so the config is basically what we're going to do to create the access token, or how we're going to create the access token. So what we'll do here is we use that Adobe auth that I was talking about before, pass in the config, and then what it does is it goes out and it gets the access token. So once that's done, we're all authenticated. And you can see I took an extra step here. I took the private key, and I was having problems reading it from my environment file. So I'm just reading it in through a file system module and just setting it directly to the configuration. So I had a little bit of problems with that, but that was the only thing I really had a problem with. Once I was able to do that, I was able to get everything working. So in this example, this one's really simple. We are just, we're not even putting any options in here. We're just setting up a input. This is the image we're sending in. This is the image that we're putting out. You can see here, it's not even an array. We just basically send it in as a simple object. And then once we've done that, we call the Sensei cutout. So what this is doing is this is going to take a look at the image, and it's going to basically try to remove the background from the image. So let me show you what the image actually is. So if we look right here, this is the Prince Albert JPEG. So if I come over here and take a look at this, we can see this is basically, it's this can here that's set up here on this table here, which there's some stuff in the background here. And what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to want to be able to run that so that we can take that image and then run it so that it removes the background. So now that I've said that, let's go ahead and actually try to run this. Before I do that, I want to show that the file one last time. So we're doing actually two calls here. So one call is to actually do the cutout. You can see here we're passing in the access token, and that's going to be our authorization bearer. And then we're taking that body that we just saw above and we're passing it in as the body here. And then once it's done that, then what we actually do here is we actually call a delay. And that delay checks every 5 seconds to see if the image has actually been written to AWS. And so what we do here is we just basically we call this reference when you make the call, it returns back this href. The href is basically a polling URL that you can use to check and see if it's completed doing it. Because some of these, if you work with a large enough image, I think it goes up to like I forget how large the images go. You can work with pretty large images. It can take a while to process that. So this one checks every 5 seconds to see if it's completed. So let's go ahead and run that. And we can see here. Now it's doing a check. You can see here that href there, that's the polling href. And there it says that it's written it here. So I have already basically for time savings here, I actually have a copy of that image here to see what it looks like. So there it is. So you can see there is that image, and it's completely removed the background here from the image. So this is a huge time-saving thing. To give you an idea of what a time-saving thing is, my first job out of college, I worked at a company where we had all these, we had a full catalog of images that we stored as high-res images. It was a big deal back then because you had to get like a large, giant RAID array that was the size of a refrigerator that stored maybe a terabyte of data. Nowadays it's like you buy one of these machines and stuff like that. It comes with, it comes with a 500 gigabytes or a terabyte, drive on it. But it's like, it was very rare to have that much storage space back then. And so we had artists that would go through with the high resolution images, and they would draw paths around the products. And so one of the first big programming tasks I had this company was I had to write these scripts that would run on our Macs. And we had it set up that would go through all of the images that we had stored. And then what it would do is it would remove the background and then save out a full-size image and also a thumbnail that we could then use on our website. So, to have something that automatically goes and removes the background for you, and this is using artificial intelligence to do this. So that's one of the things that's pretty neat about this is that they're letting you leverage some things that aren't even really available in the desktop version of the application. They do have something that will move backgrounds for you in the desktop version of Photoshop, but I'm actually finding that this is actually working better for me than the way it works in the desktop application. So let me go back here and let's take a look at some of the other examples that I have here. So one of the other examples I have is creating a, one second. One of the other examples I have is, see here. It's just basically creating like a mat of the of that. So this is one. Let's find here. So this is one of my cat. His name is Miles, and so I figured I want to be able to create like a mask that I might be able to reuse with this photo. And that's actually the mask. And this is something that's really cool, is that if I was trying to draw this out with a pen tool and stuff like that, one of the things you'll notice about this is that you can see all the individual little furs. It's got the blurs done perfectly here. I could use this to make a selection inside of Photoshop and then do anything, either with, create like a smart object with that, or I could do anything I want at the back. I could invert that and create that as like use that to manipulate the background. So for people that haven't worked with images before, or using image effects and stuff like that, this is incredibly handy. This is an incredibly handy tool. The next thing I was going to show was I had this dongle I'm trying to sell on eBay, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if I could remove the background from that? And so that's that same image as before, but here I've removed the background from it. So
yeah, I bought the Master Suite collection in 2012,
the
CS5, and there's like a magic selector, but it's not that good. So this is definitely much better.
Yes, yeah. Let's see here. All right, so next example, I was going to show essentially an example of something you can do with a Photoshop action. So let's find it here. So this is another picture of my cat. And one of the things I always kind of dug was there was a portrait that was done of Barack Obama by an artist named Shepard Farley. And it was the famous Hope poster and stuff like that. And I wanted to see if I could recreate that using basically like a set of Photoshop actions and stuff like that. So I believe he actually used Photoshop to create that poster. So I found a series of actions. Let's see here. I have them here. So this is called the Hope Pop Art, and this has instructions and stuff on how to how to run this. And so what I did is I took those actions and I ran those, and I came up with this. So that's the same image that we saw before, but it's using the posterization effects and stuff like that. There's a bunch of different things that are running in here, and the way that works, so you can see. I'm gonna come down here and show. I've created different examples here. So this one's I call Create Hope. And you'll see this, the setup here looks almost identical. The one thing that's a little bit different here is that we're passing in a reference here to our actions file. So the ATN file here, that's where all the different actions and stuff are for running this. And then if we go into the body, we can see here that we pass in the actions under our options. And then I just pass in a reference to that URL. And
okay, so I kind of was confused at first. So you don't need a Adobe Creative Cloud Photoshop subscription. This is on its own, and you pay per request, and the action doesn't come from your own Photoshop account. It comes from a bucket, just like the image.
Exactly, yes. Yes. So the thing that's interesting about that is that, like, I'm using it right now. I haven't had to pay anything to use it. And so I personally have a copy of, I have a membership for the Creative Suite. And so I use it enough to where I justify the $50 a month or whatever subscription. But a lot of stuff that I could do, there's a lot of stuff I could do programmatically now, or I could write software to do it.
Right.
And so what's nice about this is that you can have an artist create like a series of actions that you want to be able to run over and over again, a series of images. And now you can apply that to anything and just do it as a service. And so I think allowed up to like 6,000 different like operations. So I've even come close to doing that. Once you hit that number, they actually have different pricing tiers. So the first one is like, you're playing around with it. You have up to 6,000. It's free up to 6,000. After that, I think they charge something like, let's actually pull it up and see how much they charge. I'll make sure then.
Oh, so you wouldn't need a Creative Cloud account to make these, to make these images using the actions, but in order to make the actions, you would need.
That's exactly correct.
Unless you just use other people's actions. Okay, so
Yeah.
you probably still do, but maybe not.
Oh, billing metrics. So let's take a look at that real quick. So I believe they have an enterprise license that you can get with them, which is a negotiated price. But if you're just using it normally, let's see what it says here in the pricing page. It works out to be 0.15 cents per call. So essentially every API call you're going to make, they're going to charge you 15 cents. So let's say you need to do this to 100 images. That's going to cost you 15 bucks. Yeah. So essentially, we're going through this at my company right now. There's a company we're looking at using for essentially running continuous integration jobs, and they have a unique service because they have basically all these Macs they have in their cloud that you can then use, and they do all the maintenance and stuff like that. And right now, at my company, we have our own Macs that we use for doing our CI process, but we're finding it's like our DevOps team has to manage that along with all the other stuff that they have to manage. And so it's kind of like an afterthought for the Macs. And so we're thinking it's like, for what's costing us to do, to go out and buy, let's say, maybe a copy of Photoshop and pay for that and have an artist do stuff like that, it might be lower cost to just pay this per request type fee. Now, that is just the regular out the door type price. But if you are like a large company, you can negotiate something probably a lot better. So depending on how much you're doing, at the end of the day, like it's kind of like I remember hearing the statistic about McDonald's, like they only make like a couple cents off of every burger they sell, but if you sell 1 billion of them, that turns into a lot of money. So yeah, I think that Adobe, I don't know what their negotiated rates are, but I'm sure you could probably get if you're enterprise and stuff like that, you could get a better price. If you're making it as part of your application, they'll probably do something that's pretty lucrative. So let me come back here. I'm gonna go ahead and close that. This is a post that I wrote that kind of describes basically all the different steps that you need to do to use the service. Yeah, I have some examples in there of how it works, how you set up the environment variables, what you need to install to get everything working, and then I have a code example in here as well. And most of the stuff that I have as an example here, it's based off of stuff that Raymond Camden's already published. So I want to give credit where credit's due. But I'll post a link to this on the Meetup site once I'm done as well. So that, and I have all my code examples are in a GitHub repo. Right now it's a private repo, but I'm going to change that to basically to a public repo once I'm done publishing this tonight. So let me go back. All right. So last slide is really just questions. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. No, that's fine. That's fine. It's good. All right.
Awesome. That was really informative.
All right. So next month, just to kind of get a refresher, the plan is we're going to be doing one on GraphQL and Apollo and Curious. So I ran into a situation recently where I needed to be able to do it. The apps, the company I work at, we're using GraphQL now for a lot of our API calls. And so I want to get more familiar with GraphQL. And so the next presentation is going to be where we've had a previous presentation here, but it was years ago. So I kind of wanted to kind of give an update on where we are with GraphQL. And that's it. So thanks. I want to thank Availity for hosting the meeting tonight. And thanks everybody for coming out. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. All right. Oh, you do? The GraphQL?
It's a Apollo, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have like background express that we write that GraphQL.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the situation I ran into because I have an API that I host that I need to be able to have a GraphQL component of that, and I didn't want to spin up a whole separate like Apollo server, and so I wound up using Mercurius. Mercurius is a plugin for Fastify. My service is written in Fastify, so I was able to basically add this plugin and then essentially add GraphQL into my existing service. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting. Thanks everybody who attended.